This video is so important to watch right now. Not only are we going to get into exactly why the US and Iran hate each other so much, but also we're going to get into the most recent clash between these two places, and that's going to predict a lot about what is about to happen right now. This video is by RealLifeLore. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know him.
The United States and Iran have one of the world's most complicated and controversial relationships.
You can say that again, and it's been going on for like 45 years.
The United States is the world's most...
Honestly, it goes back further than that, and that's what this video is going to get into. We're going to, well, we were going to talk about one of the least subjects, one of the topics of World War II that's probably least talked about. It's really weird how Iran's involvement and the invasion of Iran in World War II, nobody really discusses that, but we finally get to talk about that here.
Most preeminent superpower with a population of more than 320 million, while Iran is a major power in her own right, with a population of more than 80 million.
Population of over 80 million, much bigger, much more people than Iraq and Afghanistan. Also in terms of land area too, it's twice the size of Texas. This is not Iraq or Afghanistan. This is so much bigger.
These countries represent 4% and 1% of the living human population. And for the past 41 years, they've had absolutely zero diplomatic relations and have come close to the brink of total war on more than one occasion.
This is the gem for so many like war hawks in the American government. Iran has been on their sites for decades. Like, this is what they've really wanted. And it dates back so far. Again, we're going to get into it, but they've always wanted. It's just crazy this is finally happening. Like, if you've been following the history here, which we are going to get into, if you've been following the history here, to see all these events take place in the last week, it just feels, I mean, it feels like a really, really long book possibly coming to a conclusion. Or maybe we're getting to the third act. Maybe we're getting to that chaotic third act where everything goes to hell.
At the beginning of 2020, war between the two sides seemed almost inevitable. The United States assassinated an Iranian major general in a drone strike, and Iran retaliated by initiating artillery strikes against American military bases across Iraq.
So this is the conflict that I was talking about in the very beginning. This is the clash, kind of the most recent big clash that these two countries have had, and this is going to tell us a lot about what's going to happen here in 2025 as Iran begins to retaliate after we, blew up their nuclear facilities, or allegedly.
Had a war broken out from there, it had the potential to become the biggest conflict in human history since the Second World War.
Absolutely. This could definitely lead to a World War III. I know that's hyperbolic. I know everyone's like throwing that around, but I don't think this video is going to get into it. It's not. But it does not talk about what China is going to do here. China might potentially have the opportunity to cause America to have another Vietnam. China and the Soviet Union during the Cold War days really hurt the U.S. by dragging us down into the Vietnam War, which ended up being over a decade long, a forever war, you could say. They could do that again right now if China starts to supply Iran with weapons and materials, and if we get locked into another full-blown war just like Vietnam, they could really hurt us, and that is definitely on the table right now.
This time, that fate was thankfully avoided. But in order to understand how it got so close and why it could still happen during another crisis in the future, you've got to understand the entire history of the conflict between America and Iran so far. And that story begins back before the start of World War II. At the beginning,
like I said, Iran does not like. You can find there's a great video of someone touring it's the U.S. Embassy. So obviously we cut diplomatic ties in 1979, after the Shah fell. So they turned the U.S. Embassy into a museum, and there's all this stuff about how much they despise America and all these, the bad things we've done, which there's a lot of bad things. So it's educational.
Of the 20th century, oil was first discovered within the deserts of Iran by the British. As more and more of these discoveries were made, it was revealed that Iran, in fact, contained the fourth largest proven reserves of oil anywhere on the planet, and that the country was an undiscovered and unrealized energy superpower. The only problem for the British, of course, was that these discoveries were located within Iran, and Iran wasn't within Britain's vast colonial empire that already spanned a quarter of the globe. Not
They had 25% of the world's surface at the time, the British Empire did, but they did not have Iran. I'm sure they wanted it, though.
too worried about that pesky little detail, Britain negotiated a deal with Iran to share in the massive profits that were bound to come from the extraction of all this oil. They created the jointly owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, but it wasn't exactly set up very fair.
Funny enough, there was a similar situation that occurred in Saudi Arabia around the same time, but yes.
Iran, the country where all of this oil was actually located, was only entitled to 16% of the company's profits, whereas the other 84% of profits were going directly to the British. By the start of the Second World War, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company
Is anyone surprised by that? I mean, that's... it's horrible, but is that surprising? It really shouldn't be, unless, yeah, I don't know. Unless you're very naive. Like, of course, the British were going to set up a crazy deal like that. I think a lot of the European powers and American power would set up a really one-sided... At the time, you got to think about the time period here. That's just what they were going to do.
Company grew to control all of Iran's oil and had grown to become the largest company in the entire British Empire. But this massively valuable asset was coming under threats. Discontent at the company's unfair terms was growing within Iran itself, while at the same time in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union and opened up the largest military front line ever seen in human history.
So remember, the European part of World War II, it already had occurred for about 2 years there, 1939. So the world... basically, the world was already in chaos, 1941. Just the U.S. hadn't joined in. They were about to, though, in that same year.
Iran stood geographically at the Soviet Union's southern flank, and their intentions were considered suspect by both the British and the Soviets. Despite having declared neutrality at the onset of the war,
I know this guy basically because of Hearts of Iron 4. I think a lot of people know this guy just because of Hearts of Iron 4.
Iran's ruling Shah, or emperor, was widely considered by the Allies to be too friendly towards the Nazis. If Iran were to have cooperated with the Axis, it could have opened up another southern front for the Soviets to deal with that would have diverted vital troops away from the critical Eastern Front. It could have jeopardized the Soviet Union's own oil fields in the Caucasus right on Iran's doorstep, and it would have potentially placed Britain's largest oil company in the hands of the Nazis. So
it's a fascinating alternative history that I feel like not enough people play with that idea if Iran joined the Axis. Now, I don't know exactly the Iranian military situation that was going on in WW2, but one thing's for sure, just like what RealLifeLore said here, I mean, if the Iranians invade through Central Asia, the Soviet Union, if they do join the Axis and they do invade through the Central Asia, there's no doubt the Soviets would have had to deviate troops and resources and tanks. So instead of focusing entirely on the Eastern Front against the Germans, they would have had to send something on the other side of the Caspian Sea. That could have made a difference. It really could have.
in order to prevent any of that from happening, and in order to ensure that
I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be on the other side of the Caspian Sea. It could be, through these mountains, but I'd imagine they might go through Central Asia. A little bit easier than to go through these mountains.
Iran could be used as a transportation corridor to get vital supplies into the Soviet Union, neutral Iran was invaded by both the Soviets and the British.
It wasn't very long, which is why a lot of people don't talk about it. It was only like a week-long invasion, but again, it's a fascinating part of World War II. I mean, for instance, like neutral countries, it's not unheard of for neutral countries to be invaded by the Allies in World War II. Look at Iceland, the UK or the British Empire at the time. They invaded Iceland because of the fear that, this was after the Germans went through Denmark in 6 hours, got through Norway. There was thoughts that the Germans were going to hop across and get Iceland too, maybe trapping the British in there. So this is not unheard of. This is desperate times. The British were, the Allies were willing to do some pretty wild things.
Vastly outnumbered and far behind in technology, Iran never stood a chance and surrendered within just a week. The old, troublesome Shah was overthrown and replaced by the invaders with his much younger 21-year-old son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, whom the Allies felt would be far less capable of acting against their interests. Iran was effectively occupied for the entire second.
So there is, again, this is before the U.S. was in. Only a couple months before, but yeah, it was just at that time, the Anglo-Soviet invasion. It was just the British Empire and just the Soviet Union. So pretty funny little team. People forget there because obviously it's after Operation Barbarossa. The Germans moved into the Soviet Union. That automatically brought the British Empire and the Soviets together. But again, that was without the third member that everyone thinks about, the USA, obviously. So not only did they replace the Shah, but they also were going to remain occupied for about 5 years there between the British Empire and the Soviet Union. So this is contributing to probably the Iranians' anger towards, well, outside forces, that's for sure.
Second World War by the Allies, which eventually saw the deployment of more than 30,000 Americans and the transportation of nearly 1/3 of all the supplies that America sent to the Soviet Union. After the war,
yeah, because when the U.S. was supplying the Soviets in their war in the Eastern Front against the Germans, they had to go through Iranian territory, and obviously that was the best way at that time to supply the Red Army, basically.
Ended. The Allies left and ended their occupation, but the unfair terms that the British had established in regards to Iran's oil came back into question. By the early 1950s, Britain was still taking home the majority of Iran's oil profits, while the conditions for Iranian oil were...
It's kind of funny, too, because, and again, I don't think we're going to get into the modern-day diplomatic situation, geopolitical situation that the Iranians are in currently in 2025, but yeah, the Iranians don't... Right now, because of just the chessboard that the world is, the Iranians and the Russians are, kind of working together. But again, they were occupied by the Soviets. They've got a weird relationship. I mean, don't think that I'm sure Putin does not want Iran to fall right now in 2025. But it does seem like they kind of have a relationship that's just kind of there, just kind of makes sense for now, but in another world, they definitely wouldn't be friends.
Workers and their families remained terrible. At the same time, the British were also withholding all of the company's financial records from the Iranians and had refused all of their requests at being audited. The support for nationalizing the company within Iran was getting overwhelmingly massive, and by 1951, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, with unanimous approval from the Iranian parliament, finally
when you looking into Iranian history, just anytime you go back, that name pops up a lot, Mossadegh.
Oh. Britain responded to this by immediately embargoing all Iranian oil, and then 2 years later, in 1953, Britain's MI6 and America's CIA organized a military coup within the country to overthrow Mossadegh's government. As many as 300 Iranians were killed during the coup. Mossadegh himself was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life, while the Shah was elevated to being essentially an authoritarian dictator within the country.
That tends to be how these things go. You go in as soon as someone. It happens so often in Latin America, but yeah, as soon as people start, people of different countries wanting a fairer deal, you'll notice a pattern of an outside force that has the good side of the deal coming in, doing a coup, basically installing an authoritarian government, because it's going to be a lot easier to control one guy than to control a lot of people.
Having had his position installed and guaranteed by Western powers twice now, the Shah became widely viewed in Iran as little more than a Western puppet. And as the Cold War developed out of the ashes of the Second World War, Iran's strategic location at the Soviet Union's southern flank, her vast strategic reserves of oil, and her authoritarian leader who owed his position and loyalty to the West, made Iran a natural and valuable ally of the United States for the very first time.
Absolutely. That's a huge ally during the Cold War, if you think about it, for the West. Because, I mean, remember those Cold War days, the world was very, very divided. And the Soviets the Soviets literally had all of Eastern Europe. Every single win that the U.S. or the British or the French could get was big. And Iran was a huge one at the time.
The Shah pursued a staunchly pro-American and pro-Israel foreign policy, and for decades...
Again, yeah, I think he's going to get into it, but Iran and Israel in the 70s were pretty cool. They were pretty cool with each other, because this is it's hard to wrap our head around it now, because Iran has been so anti-America for so long, but not that long ago, at least in terms of history, when you zoom out, they were Western allied.
Iran became one of America's most important Cold War-era allies. But over the decades, the Shah's policies and cozy relations with the West alienated much of his home base support. He ran a vast network of secret police within the country who arrested thousands of political opponents, and many more, like Ayatollah Khomeini, were exiled. Widespread torture of political dissidents in prison was reported. He outlawed the Iranian Communist Party. He continued friendly relations with both America and Israel, despite nearly none of the rest of the Islamic world even recognizing Israel, while he carried out a domestic policy of modernization, secularism, and the enfranchisement of women. All of these policies combined alienated Iran's leftists, the working class, and the hardcore Shiite Muslim conservatives and clergy, and by the late 1970s,
literally pissing off both sides very heavily here. Like that, obviously this wasn't going to go well for you. You're making the leftists and the people on the far right really, I mean, that wasn't even really a term back in those days, but the hardcore conservatives and people far on the left, very mad. Far left, far right, whatever you want to call it. It was clearly not going to go very well for him.
70s.
Maybe he was thinking his military would just keep him propped up, or maybe he just wasn't expecting his people to be able to do anything about it.
Iran's long-standing political unrest had transformed into full-scale revolution. A movie theater was set on fire in Abadan that killed at least 420 people, with the Shah's regime blaming Marxist and Islamist insurgents, while many of the
insane combination right there. Absolutely. Marxists and Islamists. That's, you don't hear those two groups grouped together.
Protesters felt like it was more likely the Shah's own secret police. The following month, protesters gathered in the capital Tehran's main square, and the Shah's army opened fire on them indiscriminately, killing and wounding hundreds more. More than 5 million Iranians took to the streets demanding the Shah's abdication, and after defections from his army became rampant, Mohammad Pahlavi realized that his position was impossible to maintain, and he fled the country in exile in early 1979. The new radical Shiite Islamist.
What's crazy about this, though, like I said a little bit earlier, like this is not new. The coup, the authoritarian, dictator propped up, that was an ally to the West at this time during the Cold War. That happened all over the world. What's crazy about Iran is that they were successful in getting that guy out. That it was kind of a rarer thing in those Cold War days.
Government that replaced the Shah's regime immediately abolished the monarchy and invited Ayatollah Khomeini back.
I mean, I'm thinking of Cuba. That is one example. That was formerly Western allied that rose up. They went communist, different direction than the direction, obviously, that Iran was about to go in.
To the country after 15 years of exile to become Iran's new supreme leader, and the modern Islamic Republic of Iran was born. And this new Iranian regime was radically different from the one that it preceded. It was a totalitarian Shiite theocracy that was staunchly opposed to the United States and Israel, and mass executions and purges of political opponents and members of the...
I mean, is it surprising what led them to that? We kind of got into a lot of the anger, dating back to World War II, and honestly, it probably goes back further than that, but you got to start somewhere for the video, right? So, we literally just got into why these people would be so angry, justifiably, but things are going to get pretty crazy now once they install their new government.
Former regime were almost immediately carried out. To the United States and the rest of the world, Iran's Islamic Revolution came as an enormous shock. Almost overnight, Iran had flipped from being one of America's most important Middle Eastern allies to her greatest Middle Eastern enemy.
Again, that is what is so crazy about the Iranian story, is that didn't really happen. This was unheard of at the time, and especially because this regime is still going. And here we are in 2025, and it's still making a massive impact on the world. It's crazy. I know I said you don't have to zoom that far back in history, as far as history goes, but it is crazy. I mean, my parents were like kids at this time when this was happening, so that's And here we are, still dealing with this.
After the Shah was overthrown, the United States welcomed him into their country for a cancer treatment operation, and the new Iran demanded that he be extradited back to stand trial for the crimes that he had committed throughout his reign against the Iranian people. Knowing that his return would mean a certain execution, the United States rejected all of Iran's demands, but that did little to dissuade Iran's revolutionary paranoia. Since the Shah was actively inside America, and since Western powers had already initiated 2 previous coups in the past to install him over the will of the Iranian people, the paranoia was widespread that America and the CIA could be plotting yet another 3rd coup attempt from within their embassy inside Tehran. And so, in November of 1979, thousands of Iranian revolutionaries and students stormed the American embassy and took 52 American diplomats and civilians as hostages.
Not advised to do that. Just ripped off my headphones. Wouldn't advise doing that. Don't really want to. Not really supposed to go into embassies. But that's not to say that people do go into embassies occasionally. But yeah, would not advise. That's for sure how you take some diplomatic hits in the eyes of the world.
America eventually sent the Shah away to Egypt while the Carter administration worked for months to secure the hostages' release. But when diplomacy...
And this hurt his presidency quite a bit. I think this is the #1 issue at the time. I wasn't alive in the 70s, but I thought it was... This is always one of the top 3 issues, I think, that comes up when you ask basically why did Carter only serve 1 term.
Went nowhere, Carter authorized a raid by the United States Army Rangers in April of 1980 to attempt a rescue operation. But the raid turned into a disaster, codenamed...
Keep in mind, this is only 4 years after the fall of Saigon. This is only a couple years in general after the whole Vietnam fiasco. So this must have been a lot for the American people. They I don't know. I don't know if they were willing to take another L like this on the diplomatic world stage.
Operation Eagle Claw, a helicopter crashed into a transport plane before any contact with the Iranians was even made, and 8 American soldiers lost their lives. Carter ordered the mission to be abandoned, and the hostages remained under Iranian control. It was at this point that the...
I hear about this, and I think about, like, other operations, the most recent operation of the B-2 bombers hitting the nuclear facilities, or the Obama raid to get Osama. Like, those like little raids, those little operations, if they go wrong, it can be detrimental to not only your presidency, but everything in the world. It's so embarrassing. Like, it's when they go right, it's a big win, but when they go wrong, oof. It hurts. It hurts the current administration in power and just the country as a whole.
The United States decided to sever all diplomatic relations with Iran's new regime, and they have been frozen ever since. But a few months later, something else incredible and unexpected happened. In September of 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq launched an all-out invasion of conquest into Iran. For years preceding this, Saddam had wanted Iraq to overtake and supplant Iran as the dominant power in the oil-rich Persian Gulf. But they were never capable of doing anything about it, because Iran had a colossally larger military, and they had the support of America and Israel, all of which made her vastly more powerful. But after Iran was thrown into chaos by her revolution and regime change, with massive purges and executions of government officials, and after she was abandoned by both America and Israel and was left without any major foreign allies, Saddam calculated that now was better than ever to take advantage and attack. Iraq expected a rapid victory.
Yeah, surprise, spoiler alert, it wasn't the best. I mean, I wouldn't say it wasn't, I think that was a fair assessment, but it was not as easy as he thought.
But the war that followed turned into an 8-year-long stalemate that most resembled the Western Front of World War I.
And you know what's crazy at this time? He doesn't get into it, and this is like just kind of a side note. The other neighbor on Iran's other side, so they're fighting Iraq on the western side, and on their eastern side, you got the Soviets and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The Middle East has just been Afghanistan is not always considered a part of the Middle East, but this region of Earth, crazy. It's always crazy in the 80s.
After the massive Iraqi invasion, Iran was forced to reevaluate the American hostage situation, and they agreed to release all 52 back into U.S. custody after holding them for 444 days. America levied heavy economic sanctions upon Iran as a consequence, and then began heavily supplying Saddam and Iraq in their war effort that they hoped would destabilize Iran even.
This is so funny because I literally just brought up the Afghanistan example, but yes, U.S. not only backed Iraq, but they were also back in Afghanistan during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Remember that our policy was to make the Soviets, the USSR, have their own Vietnam in Afghanistan, and that was the case. That really hurt the Soviet Union because it just bogged them down, and it was a multi-year war. Crazy that those two countries would eventually be invaded by the U.S.
And further, the Iran-Iraq War would ultimately prove to be one of the largest and the bloodiest of the 20th century's second half, with as many as 400,000 Iranians losing their lives across the front line, owing in part to the widespread deployment of chemical weapons and landmines from Iraq, who is being heavily supplied and supported with conventional weapons by the United States. Throughout the war,
I remember not even that long ago looking into there's a lot of great videos that analyze it, but the way Iraq was set up, just from a geographical, just in terms of geography, they were always going to be forced to be this they were always going to be forced into a war. They were just really flat, very vulnerable. They had to be aggressive. I think that we're going to get into the Operation Desert Storm, their invasion of Kuwait. Because not only do they go after Iran, then they're going to go after Kuwait. That's really going to piss off the world. Obviously, they were going to pay heavily for that.
The U.S. contends that Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist militia organization operating out of Lebanon who is a client of Iran, carried out multiple anti-American terror attacks across the region. In 1983, they carried out a bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, which killed 17 Americans, and later that same year, they carried out another massive truck bombing attack against the barracks of a military compound in Lebanon, which killed a further 241 Americans and 58 French soldiers.
Wow.
These events and others contributed to the United States placing Iran on their state sponsors of terrorism list the following year in 1984. By April of 1988, the Iran-Iraq...
Iran's been doing that for a long time. Since the revolution, since the 79 revolution. They're sponsoring they've been sponsoring a whole lot of very horrible things.
War was still raging, and Iran had mined a large section of the...
And part of that comes down to Iran doesn't really have the capabilities of being an offensive nation. They don't really have the military to be like Russia, for instance, to go into another, to go all the way into Germany, because we're just talking about World War II, to go and be an invading force. Iran is a very defensible nation. Their terrain, their things like that. Militarily, they don't have the best equipment. So anyways, it's a lot easier to just sponsor chaos instead of going out there and having to do it yourself.
The Persian Gulf in order to counter the Iraqi Navy. An American frigate who happened to be...
And we're talking about it. We're going to get into it. But also, the Iranian Navy has always been horrible. So, again, Iran needs to... Right now, they need to try their best thing they could hope for in terms of a war with the U.S. is they fight a defensive war. Going on the offensive, leaving their own territory, that's out of the question. But fighting the U.S. in their own backyard, man, that would be insane. That is how they're... look at it historically. There's only a few examples of Iran ever being conquered, or the people of the Iranians, the Persian Empire, or the equivalent Persian empires. It's like the Mongolians, and then there's, of course, like Alexander the Great. You've got to go back a long time, but if you, just scrub through a timeline of history, there's always a very solid people empire in Iran, or modern-day Iran. It's a very hard place to conquer. There's so many people. It's always there. And it's always the thorn in the side of a lot of other empires. Look at the Romans, the Greeks, the Ottomans even. It's always a big deal. Yeah, it's always been a big deal.
Be passing through struck one of these mines and became severely damaged and almost sank, but with no loss of life. Regardless, America decided to initiate a retaliatory attack against Iranian targets and initiated Operation Praying Mantis. It was the largest U.S. naval combat operation seen since the Second World War, and it saw 2 American surface groups launching coordinated strikes that blew up 2 Iranian offshore oil platforms and sank 6 of their warships. The attack destroyed or severely damaged half of Iran's entire fleet and killed 56 Iranians, while resulting in only 2 American deaths. Just 3 months later, in July of 1988, an American cruiser strayed into Iranian territorial waters and received warning shots fired from Iranian speedboats. At the same time, Iran...
That's like most of the Iranian Navy. It's just like little speedboats, which can do some damage. And then currently, they have drones and things like that, obviously missiles. But yeah, their Navy, them being a naval power, even like on a historical level, has honestly never really been a thing.
On Air Flight 655 that was taking its normal flight route above from Tehran to Dubai.
This is so
and was
sad. I'm so glad he talked about this, though. I didn't know this was an event that occurred up until like a couple years ago, because I like to watch like aviation disaster videos. That sounds crazy. That sounds like I'm a psycho. But this really good. I think like Mayday disasters. There's so many different shows that cover aviation disasters, and this was one of the stories. I didn't know this happened. It's so sad.
At this point, flying over Iran's territorial waters above the Strait of Hormuz. The American cruiser misidentified this commercial aircraft as an Iranian fighter jet, and, assuming that they could have been under attack, they launched a missile that targeted and then completely destroyed the whole plane. There were 290 people on board that flight, and 254 of...
I mean, again, if Iran and the people of Iran already really didn't like America, I don't know. I don't know if it makes it 10 times worse, because it's hard to be, if you already dislike America 10 out of 10, you can't really dislike them times 10 more. I guess you could, but I guess it's just re-ups the population of like, oh yeah, I forgot that. If anyone was forgetting that they despise us, this is a nice reminder.
Them were Iranians. None of them survived the missile strike. And it was the deadliest aviation shoot-down incident in history until the horrible shoot-down of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17.
It's so depressing how often this has happened. Commercial jets, commercial planes getting shot down by accident. It's like there's accidents, there's aviation accidents, and then there's this stuff. There's also... The Soviets did something similar as well. I think with the South Korean flight around the same time. I think maybe it was a couple years after. But I think it was a South Korean flight that maybe got too close to Soviet airspace, and then bam, got shot down too.
Over Ukraine by pro-Russian rebels more than a quarter century later. These deadly events between both sides sharply escalated tensions between America and Iran, and each felt that the other had done grievous harm towards them. In 1995, the Clinton administration enacted a total embargo on all dealings with Iran by any American-based company, which effectively killed all trade between both countries. In 1996, the Iranian client Hezbollah carried out yet another terror bombing strike against a U.S. target in Saudi Arabia, this time killing 19 American...
I know that it doesn't necessarily contribute like much to this story with Iran, but I did wish we kind of got into Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. That was a pretty big deal. We kind of jumped from the 80s to 1995, but 1991 would have been kind of interesting just to... from Iran's perspective, to be watching the whole thing occur. The world pretty much united against Iraq and Saddam, and that must have been pretty terrifying for them to see, honestly.
Air Force personnel and wounding nearly 500 others. And then, 5 years after that, came the September 11th attacks. Just 4 months after 9/11, US President Bush made his Axis of Evil speech, in which he lumped Iran, Saddam's Iraq, and North Korea all together as an axis of evil conspiring.
So it's funny, when he made that speech, I was a kid. I had no idea what the hell he was talking about. But I do remember hearing that these were the 3 countries, and the media was blasting all over the place. But looking back at it now, if like knowing what I do now, you don't even need the context of like recent history. Like whenever he gave that speech, I don't know if that was 2003 or what, but probably 2003. You just have to look back to the past, not even that far back, from 2003, 20 years earlier. I mean, Iraq and Iran were literally at war. This is just a crazy, crazy statement that clearly must have worked. I'm assuming the American people bought it, the axis of evil thing. But I think it's brought up so often now, especially now in 2025. But it's been brought up for the last several years because of how kind of ridiculous it is. These three countries. It's not like they were. We're not talking World War II status of. This is not Germany, Italy, and Japan coming together and forming the Axis. But the way the statement is set up, Axis of Evil, that's what it sounds like. Very good marketing. Political marketing. That's one way to put it. Propaganda.
Firing against America. Just a little more than a year after that speech, the United States used the pretext of Saddam possessing weapons of mass destruction to invade Iraq and completely toppled his regime in around a month. No weapons of mass destruction were ever uncovered, and the message sent to both Iran and North Korea was clear as day.
I just want to say, this is getting brought up so often that, the justification to invade Iraq was for the weapons of the WMDs, and they're comparing that to now Iran. I have to say, it's a different situation. It's a very different situation that's going on, but I'm just seeing a lot of people compare like those two things, and just look. It's not that difficult to look into and see. You can't really compare and contrast. You can contrast the two, but I'd be careful making those two comparisons.
Was either develop nuclear weapons or you would be next. North Korea managed to successfully test an atomic bomb just 3 years after the American-led invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, so 2006, and they're still going, and it's not even a question on anyone's mind how we're going to regime change. Maybe not regime. I'm sure we want it, but like the regime change in Iran has been hovering in the American public for, like I said, decades now. But this in North Korea? No one's talking about that. Why? Because in 2006, they got their own WMDs, and it's over. It is over.
While Iran hastily carried out their own nuclear weapons research as well. However,
we're not going to be able to do anything about North Korea. It's over. Which is why this is a big deal. It is a big deal to not give Iran the chance to get a WMD, because then it is over. We're not going to be able to take the risk and invade them.
The United States made it clear that a nuclear-armed Iran would never be tolerated, and a combination of sanctions and diplomacy were used for years to try and convince Iran to stop. By 2015, the Obama administration had successfully negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known colloquially as the Iran nuclear deal. The treaty's terms are complex, but the TLDR is that the US agreed to end a sweeping series of sanctions they had previously placed upon Iran, while Iran agreed to give up their pursuit of nuclear research and allowed foreign inspections to routinely investigate them. Iran's and America's relationship was beginning to show some signs of rapprochement. But then, things took another curveball. In 2016, Donald Trump was elected the new president of the United States on a platform that included a vow to fully withdraw the US from the Iran nuclear deal and to reinstate tougher economic sanctions. In 2018, Trump carried through with these campaign promises, and Iran counter-threatened that they would continue on with their nuclear program and even close the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping if things escalated any further, which would have completely crashed the global oil economy.
And that's being talked about a lot right now, that's going to happen again. But then also a lot of people are talking about how China, a potential very close ally to Iran right now, would not be able to allow that because a lot of Iranian oil goes to the Chinese.
Relations between the two were back to being tense, and then things got even worse the next year. In May and June of 2019, several merchant ships traveling through the Persian Gulf were damaged in two separate violent incidents. The West blamed Iran, and then Iran denied all involvement. In June, Iran shot down an American drone that was flying over the Strait of Hormuz, and tensions increased even further. And then in July, an Iranian oil tanker was seized by the UK as it was passing through the Strait of Gibraltar on the grounds that it was shipping oil to the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria.
Because remember, not that long ago, the Iranians had a nice kind of bit of a friend out of Syria, out of Assad. So now he's gone, which is why Iran, like I keep saying, is in a very vulnerable position. I mean, Israel's hit them very hard. They lost Assad. Russia's bogged down in Ukraine. They're kind of tied up there. So a lot of things are going on where the Iranians have lost a lot of their friends.
In direct violation of EU sanctions. Iran countered this by capturing a British oil tanker and taking its crew hostage as it was later passing through the Persian Gulf. Both sides eventually released the other ships and crew, but it was clear that tensions were reaching a boiling point. And then they dramatically escalated near the end of the year. On the 27th of December 2019, a rocket artillery attack from some assailant on America's K-1 military base in Iraq left one U.S. civilian contractor dead and 4 other soldiers wounded. America blamed the attack on Hezbollah and other Shiite Islamist militias supported by Iran, though both Hezbollah and Iran denied all responsibility. At this point, there were about 5,000 U.S. troops who were stationed in Iraq who were helping in the ongoing fight against ISIL. And 2 days later, on the 29th, they decided to initiate a retaliatory strike against Hezbollah's weapons depots and command centers across both Iraq and Syria. These American airstrikes.
So we're kind of getting into basically the most recent clash between these two countries. So take notes, because this is probably what we're going to see very likely in the coming days.
Killed 25 Hezbollah-affiliated militiamen and wounded nearly 60 others. Escalating things even further a couple days after that, on December the 31st, Iran-backed militiamen stormed and attacked the United States Embassy in Baghdad. The embassy was heavily vandalized, but nobody on either side was killed, and the US blamed Iran once again for the provocation. And then came the 3rd of January 2020, when the already high tensions skyrocketed to levels never seen before.
It's funny because everyone forgets this. This is something that goes completely over most people's minds in the West, especially in the US, because it's 2 months before COVID. In fact, COVID was already out, January 2020. So, in March is when the shutdowns really began. But everyone forgets this conflict.
4. Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian major general widely believed to be the second most powerful figure within the Iranian regime, had just arrived in Baghdad on a flight. He was scheduled to meet with Iraq's prime minister later on in the day, but as he departed the Baghdad airport in a convoy of vehicles, a US drone that had been hovering nearby overhead fired a series of missiles that completely destroyed them. This missile strike had been personally authorized and ordered by President Donald Trump himself, and resulted in the deaths of Soleimani and 9 others. This event profoundly changed the crisis between Iran and the United States. It was the first—
Again, amping up tension. If there's any amount of time that goes by where maybe tensions are going to lower a little bit, something amps it all up again, and the despising— specifically Iran's despisal of the U.S. is what ramps up. I think a lot of Americans don't really care. In fact, I think a lot of Americans really do not want war with Iran. I'm surprised when I know that there are some that do, but I want to believe a majority really don't want. Now, there's a lot of Americans that were okay with the nuclear raids, the B-2 bomber, hit on nuclear facilities. But once you start talking about boots on the ground, I think overwhelmingly America's not going to be for that.
First time that America had assassinated
the people. It's the government that's in a completely different situation. They will do it.
Major military leader of a major foreign country since the plot to kill Isoroku Yamamoto of the Japanese Imperial Navy back in 1943, who had been the mastermind of the Pearl Harbor attacks. 2 days later, Iran announced that it would no longer abide by any of the terms of the 2015 nuclear deal, and demanded that Iraq remove all of the American presence from their country. And then, on the 8th of January—
I know that this is going to take a while for us to get this information, I'm thinking, but I'm just so curious when or if we will find out exactly how close the Iranians were to building a nuke. We probably are decades away from that information, maybe, unless we get regime change next year, and like another I mean, I guess it's possible. I guess anything's possible. Or in a couple weeks. I don't even know. Anything is possible, but I'm very curious when we will get the information of exactly how close the Iranians actually were. Because I don't even know. Honestly, if I was a betting man, if I had to go to Vegas right now and put money on it, you actually don't even need to go to Vegas. There are like websites where you can bet on the most like ridiculous things. I feel like they can't be that close. I mean, they've been trying for decades now, since the 80s. I don't know. And I'm talking about before the raids, before the nuclear raid. But who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. But something tells me it's like, man, are they that close? Yeah, I feel like we're going to get the information and we're going to find out, oh, they need another like 10 to 20 years to really, to be able to actually build the first nuke. I don't know.
5 days after Soleimani's
That's a complete speculation. We won't know. And I just hope we get the information eventually.
death, Iran launched its own retaliatory strike against America. Codenamed Operation Martyr Soleimani, Iran initiated multiple ballistic missile strikes against 2 U.S. military bases within Iraq, and the entire world held its breath.
So basically, again, we're diving really deep into this conflict that happened a couple years ago, this clash between these two nations. But this is what is literally happening right now. They're literally with Qatar. Luckily, all the missiles were shot down, but they did shoot missiles into U.S. bases again. So how many more will they send out? How much will things escalate? Sometimes there's speculation that basically the Iranians or someone on the Iranian side is informing, whether it's Qatar or U.S. bases, hey, we're about to launch nukes we're going to launch missiles at you. That's basically what happened a year ago when the Iranians first sent the first fleet of missiles into Israel. They kind of warned Israel beforehand. So is that going to keep going, or that's how things like really, they can escalate though. They can escalate.
This was the closest that America and Iran had ever come to full-scale war, and the crisis could have easily escalated.
That at the time was, not anymore, not with the new situation that just took place a couple days ago.
Into that. America had already rapidly deployed thousands of soldiers to the Persian Gulf from the U.S. East Coast in the days between Soleimani's death and this Iranian artillery attack, but thankfully, nobody was killed by it. The bases experienced significant damage to buildings and infrastructure, but everybody present remained alive. And this was sort of a godsend because it gave both Iran and America the opportunity to de-escalate without losing any face.
There are reports that the U.S. knew the attack was coming. Like the Iranians told them, hey, we're going to attack this base, leave. Because, Iran needs to respond to look strong, but they do not want to escalate the situation anymore. Both sides, and that's happening right now. It feels like they're both tiptoeing, but again, that's a slippery slope. And all of a sudden, someone could start falling, slipping down, and then boom, we have full-scale war. But both sides kind of tiptoeing, and they've been tiptoeing since right now. It's funny. There's lots of talk. It's like the Cold War days. It's like that meme of the two dogs barking at each other through the gate, and then as soon as the gate opens, they stop barking. That's kind of Iran and the U.S. right now as well.
Iran got to look strong and powerful by firing rockets at American targets, and without any casualties, America was given the option not to retaliate, which is what.
See, and that's literally what's happening right now. That's what happened a year ago when Iran felt the need that they needed to do something to look strong against Israel. So they needed to at least launch missiles. Just, make sure to inform the other side, hey, we're launching missiles. Please shoot them all down because we don't actually want to cause deaths and we don't want to escalate any further.
What they chose to do. Unfortunately, though, tragedy still managed to find a way to strike. While Iran likely designed the attack intentionally to not cause any American casualties, Iran didn't necessarily know that the US wasn't going to retaliate, and their anti-air batteries across the country were on high alert for any kind of response. One of these missile batteries detected what they believed to be an American cruise missile on their radar, and they opened fire on it with 2 surface-to-air missiles. It turned out that the target wasn't a cruise missile at all, but was just a regularly scheduled commercial airliner that had just taken off.
There is another example. I don't know how many times it's going to happen.
From Tehran International Airport mere minutes before.
Yeah.
The plane in question was Ukraine International Airlines.
That is the scary thing when you are on the precipice of war like this, is everyone gets a lot more paranoid and a lot more mistakes get made, and chaotic things happen like this. That's the situation we're in currently right now.
It's Flight 752, traveling from Tehran to Kiev with 176 people on board. The Iranian missiles completely destroyed the plane and killed everybody on board, including 82 Iranian and 63 Canadian citizens. Initially,
63 Canadians. That is a lot of Canadians on this flight from Tehran to Ukraine. That's interesting.
the Iranian government denied all responsibility and attempted to cover the disaster up by blaming the crash on technical faults with the plane itself. But after raising suspicion when they wouldn't allow any investigators access to the crash site, the government finally admitted to mistakenly shooting the plane down a few days later on January 11th.
That's rough.
That attempted cover-up sparked massive protests across Iran and against the regime, and the brink of war against the United States had just narrowly been avoided. Hundreds of innocent people died as a result of the conflict between Iran and the United States in 2020. But of course, it could have always been far worse. Had the conflict escalated by any number of countless different ways, all-out war could have broken out.
There's unlimited amount of options, countless amount of options that can escalate these things. In these in this moment 5 years ago, and in these moments right now. That's what's scary about right now.
That would have resulted in the deaths of many, many more. I only hope that peace between my country and Iran can be maintained in the future. But at the same time, I'm aware of how precarious this peace is and the history behind all of this. And I'm fearful that one day in the future, we might not get as relatively lucky as we did at the beginning of 2020. This video
is a tough one. I don't know how things just randomly get better. I don't know if they can. I mean, it's in the very blood of the current regime of Iran and the U.S. to really to fight. I don't know, unless governments change drastically.
It was originally released on Nebula as a part of my exclusive Modern Conflict series nearly 4 years ago in September of 2021. A lot has happened between the United States and Iran since then, which is why I decided to release this video on YouTube now. I'll be making videos about the current changes in the US-Iran conflict very shortly. But in the meantime, if you'd like to help support my channel, the best way that you can possibly do so is by signing up to Nebula.
Such a great thumbnail to show all the US bases that surround Iran right now. So those are all potential targets that Iran could hit if they wanted. But that's going to escalate the situation.
Where you can watch nearly 50 other exclusive episodes in my Modern Conflict series right now that'll give you further context behind the major events that are shaping our world today.
I mean, essentially at this point, we're just waiting to see how they respond. They are responding somewhat. It doesn't seem like they're responding maybe as aggressively, but they could at any point. At any point, they could be like, tomorrow, they can be like, okay, we're going to go ahead and just, I don't even know, drop the worst thing, just literally declare war. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think anyone knows. That is going to be the biggest mystery. We'll have to figure it out. But if you want more content like this, please consider subscribing. I'm going to keep bringing it to you. These are the patrons for this month. If you'd like to join, check that link down below to patreon.com. If Greenland is the largest island, then Australia is its own continent again, right? Drew Supremacy League. Drew's Argentinian Trust Fund. Rip Grandpa. Connor Pavlik. Carmel S. Douche Baggins. Alexander the Terrible. Frederick King. Tiblin. Bear Hayes. Luxembourg Lover. Miglu the Goat. Nolan. Nord Tyrol. And Tambrin.